How did you get involved in politics?
So, like a lot of people, completely by accident, it sort of dragged me in rather than wanting to be involved. So the first thing I remember, I like a lot of people, I'd watch political content on YouTube or whatever else about my age, and you knew that a lot of weird stuff was going on. But the thing that made me politicized was that Count Dankula being arrested and then charged scared the hell out of me. For people who aren't familiar,
That's for the Hitler pug dog salute thing.
yeah, so he taught his pug dog to say, well, to raise its paw like Heil Hitler, and he made a video. It was a joke. The cops didn't get the joke. The judge didn't get the joke. It was a complete farce. The only reason the police pursued this is they wanted a conviction, presumably, and it blew up in their face politically. Like they became a laughingstock. But the fact that a man could be charged with a crime because he had made a joke on the internet that had caused no harm to anyone in any possible way, other than, well, actually, they couldn't actually find someone who was offended by the video. They had to show it to the Scottish Council of Jews and get them offended by it. Like the police did that on purpose. So then they had a case, but no one was offended, even. No one was hurt, blah, blah. And yet this dude was facing years in jail. That really scared me. It's not the kind of country I wanted to live in. So I got involved in the campaign to write letters to every MP in the country, completely non-partisan when we started out with the Liberalists, and we tried to get MPs to overturn the law. We got, I think, about 100 and something MPs who agreed at the time that what was happening was ridiculous. But unfortunately, the way our government is structured, that amounted to nothing. So the law still stands as it is. And if you post anything online that is grossly offensive, you're a criminal.
I remember that. I remember that as if that was yesterday, and I remember thinking, what have we come to? Where a joke, you may find it offensive. You might even say it wasn't a very funny joke, or that joke was in bad taste. But that doesn't matter, because for everyone you can find who says that's in bad taste, you'll find 10 more who'll go, that's hilarious. Have you ever heard of an American filmmaker and comedian called Mel Brooks?
Yeah, I've heard of him.
He's done lots of, I mean, he's Jewish. He's done lots of films taking the mickey out of the Nazis. And a lot of his jokes are very similar to Count Dracula. He, if he was alive today and put that sort of stuff and created it for the first time and put it on YouTube or Twitter, he'd be arrested in this country. And he's a Jewish man taking the mickey out of the Nazis. It's surreal.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things here is that this is all a bit legislative and maybe a bit boring, but that law only applies to online speech. It does not apply to offline speech. There is actually no equal for that law, because if you did, I mean, you'd just spend all day arresting people for being in the pub. So Jimmy Carr, for example, was able to make his joke recently in which he said, what was it? People say the Holocaust was terrible, but there's fewer gypsies. Or that was the premise of the joke. That it's good that all the gypsies are dead. But because he made that on a stage and then it was uploaded to Netflix, he wasn't in trouble. But if he was a YouTube comedian, that would be jail. I mean, at minimum, it would be a serious fine. And that's obviously not right. I mean, it would be hilarious if this was the law in Russia and we could laugh at the foreigners and their backwardness. But this is England, a place that purportedly prides itself on its free speech and blah, blah, blah. But we don't. The reality is 3,000 people every year get arrested for that.
That's an excellent point. We used to laugh at other countries who had silly rules and silly laws, who used to persecute free speech in their countries, and we'd laugh at them, and we always thought we were better than them. And now we're just like them.
For a point of comparison, I mentioned, so every year, the latest statistics I have, about 3,000 every year get arrested. Most of them get a fine. Quite a few get prison time. But in Russia, a country that's much larger, and obviously what they're doing is terrible, but they arrest and put away around 900 people every year. I mean, this is just a point of comparison of we are obsessed with tiny nonsense to the point that we are arresting mass numbers of people for jokes. There was one autistic girl in, I believe it was Manchester, actually. Maybe wrong. No, she was Liverpool. Chelsea Russell. You should look her up if you've not heard of the case. She posted song lyrics on her Instagram because her best friend had died. And the best friend loved this American rapper called Snapdog. Snapdog is a African American gentleman who makes rap songs, so you can guess the lyrics. So for quoting those lyrics, she was given a fine and a curfew. She was, I believe, 15. I don't know what the curfew was meant to do. She posted them online from her house, but that's the state of the situation. I mean, and the courts just can't be given this power. They apparently can't even determine what's a crime and what's not. So that's the state of Britain for me, and what politicized me into getting into this.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. And going back to that girl in Liverpool, so now it's illegal to quote the lyrics from a black American artist because that's offensive. And offensive to who? And it would be to black people. Well, I'm quoting the lyrics from a black artist. But the N word now has that power. The N word can only be spoken. It's a magical word. It can only be spoken by a black person. No one else is allowed to say it, refer to it, or even write it down. It has special powers now.
I mean, the profanity is actually something I have a bit of an obsession with in a good way, which is that the N word in English, like that whole conversation is very interesting because in that case, actually, no one was offended again because they were just song lyrics. There was a black female police officer who said she might have been, and that was what the case hinged on. Anyway, but with profanity in the West, you get a sense of just how silly this law is when you think about it. There's a guy who wrote a book called the HSFN Principle. And each one of those words stands for a category of profanity. So H is holy words, S is excrement words, F, sex words, and N, racial slurs, right? And what you can do with all languages is actually jot them up, like all of their profanity words, into those categories. And it just about works for every language that we've discovered. And the funny thing is, you can actually see in different cultures, they value certain kinds of profanity more. So in Germany, for example, bodily excretions, the S one, that's valued higher than the F words about sex. Whereas in English, we value the F words more. But then when you start breaking it down and looking at, well, what is profanity? Well, it's just words until the context is provided. And then you go back to a case like that with Chelsea Russell, you realize, oh my God, this whole thing is literally over nothing. I mean, it can be scary to somebody when, oh God, the M word was used online, but when you really get into it, nothing has happened in the slightest. It really is worthless because the context is it's a guy singing about his best friends, but he's a black American rapper, so he doesn't say best friends or good chums. So
yeah, and I like the way you broke down those 4 categories of basically swear words, and those categories come in and out of fashion. So 50, 60, 70 years ago, the words we use today, which has no consequence, which would have been appalling 50, 60, 70 years ago. And some of the racial slurs we're not allowed to say today, we could say quite easily 30, 40 years ago. Words, and especially obscenities, coming out of fashion, and they are quite cultural, and things change over time.
I mean, it's quite funny. We had Zuby in the office, and I mean, that point about what's allowed and what's not allowed is actually quite telling about your culture. Because, of course, you could say in 1940s, the racial slur category, it isn't valued at all. It's completely different. Whereas the holy words might have been more forbidden. And Zuby was mentioning, just as he travels the world and he runs into people, and people in America whine about white supremacy in the modern day. It's like, dude, what white supremacy? What world are you living in? I mean, in the English language, I mean, just on that profanity part, racial slurs are now the worst profanity that we have. And that sort of tells you what's not acceptable. And you would have thought indicators like this would stop people saying we live in some kind of white supremacist patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. But hey, that's leftist for you. So let's not get into that rabbit hole of nonsense.
No. Yeah. And I think the biggest mistake you just made there was trying to find logic in it. There is no logic in any of it, and we need to stop looking. It's a word game they use as a weapon. So when someone's battering you over the head with a club, there's no point trying to figure out, is that oak or is that teak? And is that handcrafted? You're being assaulted, so don't worry about the weapon. And that's what we do sometimes with the left. We try to work out their understanding and their logic, and there isn't any.
But that's the point, getting back to how I got into politics. I mean, that law was passed by Tony Blair. I don't know if this was the intended consequence, but the reality is that law is used by left-wing activists to try and take down normal people who may make a joke you don't like, but also just get used against people who just politically disagree with them. And well, our culture does value left-wing politics more highly than right-wing politics, I believe. It's when it comes to the criminal justice system. I mean, most recent one has got to be Lawrence Fox's swastika of tolerance. I don't know if you're familiar with what I'm speaking of. So if you take the pride flag, make 4 of them. But the reality is that we have laws on the books that are not just speech laws, but are then used in a political way to shut down activists who are against the left or make fun of left-wing things, like Lawrence did. And so I got into politics. We managed to get UKIP to agree at the time, because we joined UKIP campaigning with them, that this law was nonsense and definitely needed to go. And I don't know why the Conservatives haven't. I don't know why there is no noise about this from Conservative MPs. We've tried. We emailed, as I said, we got like more than 100 Conservative MPs who said it needed to go. But it's still there. And this is years on since I got involved.
During the Tory election campaign last month, Liz Truss did say that if she wins, there'll be no law. How did she word it? I can't remember how she worded it, but she basically said there'll be no law that criminalises speech online that isn't criminalised if you said it face to face.
Well, that would be beautiful if she does it.
Yeah, that's what she said. Now, that doesn't mean we'll get what we want, because she might then transfer the law online and say this now applies face to face. So it could even get, I don't think, I'm joking, she won't do that, but technically what she said, she could mean that as well.
You never know, man. I mean, like, stranger things have happened.
Well, exactly. And that's what happens when you write bad laws. If you write a badly worded law, that means somebody else who's slightly cleverer than you can twist it and make it mean what they want it to mean. That's why it's an art, a skill. That's why we need other chambers and other people looking at laws before they become in law, because a badly worded law can do anything you want it to do. And the Miscommunication Act is one of those laws.